The wrench hit the concrete floor with a sharp clang that echoed through Martinez Auto Works. Elena Vasquez, 35 and oil-stained, stood frozen beneath the lifted Ford F-150, her heart hammering against her ribs. Across the garage, Navy. SEAL Lieutenant Marcus Thompson sneered, his voice cutting through the humid Arizona air like a blade. "I asked for your best mechanic, not someone playing dress-up." The radio went silent. Even the perpetual hum of the air compressor seemed to pause. Elena's co-workers, Danny, Rick, and Miguel, suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Nobody defended her. Nobody even looked her way. Frank Martinez, the garage owner, emerged from his office with sweat beading on his forehead despite the industrial fans. "Lieutenant Thompson, I apologize. Let me get Danny to handle this personally." "Your advertisement says expert mechanics," Marcus growled, his 3 SEAL companions forming an intimidating semicircle. "I see amateurs and quota fillers." The words dripped like acid. Elena felt them burn, not because of her gender, but because they assumed she was hired to fill numbers rather than for skill. She had heard it before, countless times over the past 5 years in Riverside, but today something felt different. What they didn't know was that Elena carried a secret that could change everything if she dared to reveal it. "I can fix it," Elena said quietly. The garage fell silent. She had never volunteered for important work, never challenged the established hierarchy. Her voice, barely above a whisper, somehow carried more weight than Marcus's booming commands. Danny shifted uncomfortably. Rick studied his wrench like it held the secrets of the universe. Miguel gripped his tools tighter, his knuckles white. Rodriguez, the unit's mechanic, stepped forward with theatrical disgust. "Look at this. She's using the wrong wrench size. Probably Googled how to fix cars this morning." Jackson, another SEAL, laughed, a sharp sound that ricocheted off the metal walls. "My daughter plays with toy cars too. Maybe they could have a play date." Elena's hands trembled as she gripped her wrench. These weren't just any hands. Scars from years of precise work crossed her palms. Her fingernails, kept short by necessity, bore permanent oil stains. But she had learned to hide her strength, to appear less capable than reality demanded. Survival in Riverside required invisibility. "The turbocharger synchronization is off," she continued, her voice steady despite the mockery. "You're second. Turbo engages 0.3 seconds late. It's causing pressure variations that will crack the manifold." Marcus stopped mid-insult. That level of diagnostic precision required either extraordinary luck or genuine expertise. "She read that online," Jackson insisted. "Anyone can memorize terminology." "Then let anyone fix it," Elena replied, meeting Marcus's skeptical gaze. "But when your engine fails during the mission, remember you had the chance to prevent it." Frank grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly. Fear radiated from him rather than anger. He needed military contracts. Offending Navy SEALs meant financial ruin for his small-town garage. "Elena, return to your station. Now." She looked at her boss, seeing the desperation in his eyes. The same desperation that had driven her to accept this job 5 years ago, when she had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. "The fuel injector is already degrading," she told Marcus directly. "You have maybe 30 minutes before permanent damage. Your choice." The F-150's engine coughed, a mechanical wheeze that confirmed her diagnosis. Danny whistled low. He had heard that sound before, always followed by expensive repairs. But admitting Elena's expertise meant acknowledging 5 years of dismissing her contributions. As Elena retreated to the cramped break room, her hands shook. 5 years of silence. 5 years of accepting humiliation with grace. 5 years of pretending incompetence to avoid conflict. All of it was crashing down because she couldn't watch precision machinery suffer for human prejudice. Her phone buzzed with a message from Detroit, a number she hadn't seen in years. She deleted it without reading, but the damage was done. Memories she had buried deep began clawing their way to the surface. Little did she know that deleted message contained news that would change everything. In her locker, beneath worn coveralls and a thermos that had seen better days, lay her personal toolkit, professional-grade instruments that cost more than Most cars in the parking lot. She had brought them from Detroit, unable to abandon tools that felt like extensions of her soul. Wrapped in oilcloth was a photograph, her father standing beside her at graduation, pride radiating from every angle. His handwriting on the back remained legible despite years of handling. "My daughter, never let anyone define who you are." Talent speaks louder than words. Outside, she heard the F-150's engine struggling. Marcus shouted orders while Danny and Rick fumbled with diagnostics they didn't understand. The sound grew worse, metal straining against inevitable failure. Elena closed the locker, photograph still in her hand. Her father wouldn't recognize the woman she had become, hiding talent to avoid conflict, accepting disrespect to maintain peace. But perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps dignity could be reclaimed, not through confrontation, but through undeniable demonstration. The engine coughed again, the death rattle of precision machinery murdered by ignorance. Elena made her decision. 3 days later, the tension in Martinez Auto Works had thickened like motor oil left too long in summer heat. Elena arrived early, as always, but found the garage buzzing with an energy that made her stomach clench. Word had spread about the Navy SEAL incident, and not in her favor. "Morning, Ella," Danny called out, but his usual friendly tone carried an edge. Rick nodded tersely from behind the parts counter. Only Miguel offered his customary warm smile, though even he seemed more cautious than usual. Frank emerged from his office, clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. "Elena, we need to talk." Her heart sank. The private conversation she had been dreading was finally here. "Look," Frank began once they were alone in his cramped office, surrounded by yellowed invoices and faded automotive calendars. "That thing with the military boys, it's got people talking. Customers are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" Elena asked, though she already knew. "About whether we're running a professional operation or some kind of..." He paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Training program for inexperienced mechanics." The words stung, because they were so far from the truth. Elena had been fixing cars since she could hold a wrench, had earned her mechanical engineering degree with honors, had once led a team of 50 designers at one of Detroit's most prestigious firms. But here in Riverside, her resume began and ended with oil changes and tire rotations. "I fixed their truck," she said quietly. "The engine runs better now than when it left the factory." "That's not the point." Frank's voice carried a frustration that wasn't entirely directed at her. "This is a small town, Elena. People talk. Mrs. Gonzalez heard from her nephew, who works at the base, that you supposedly embarrassed some SEALs, made them look foolish. I did my job. Your job is what I say it is." The words came out harsher than Frank intended. He softened slightly, but the damage was done. "Look, I like you. You're reliable, punctual, and you don't cause trouble. But I've got a business to run. The military contracts alone keep us afloat." Elena understood the unspoken message: stay invisible or find another job. In Riverside there weren't many options for a woman who worked with her hands. "I understand," she said, though the words tasted like pennies in her mouth. "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page." Frank stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Oh, and Elena, Lieutenant Thompson is bringing his truck back this afternoon. Some kind of follow-up inspection. I want Danny handling it personally." As Elena returned to the garage floor, she caught fragments of conversation that stopped abruptly when she appeared. Words like uppity and showing off floated through the air like toxic fumes. She had heard them before, in different contexts, in different cities, but they always carried the same message: know your place. Miguel approached her station as she began working on a routine brake job. "You okay, Hermana?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Miguel was the only one who had ever called her sister, the only one who seemed to see past the surface assumptions that defined her in this place. "That was impressive the other day," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "I've been working on cars for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose a turbo issue that fast." Just lucky, Elena deflected, but Miguel shook his head. Nah, that wasn't luck. That was skill. Real skill. He paused, studying her face. Where did you learn to work like that? The question hung in the air between them. Elena had been waiting 5 years for someone to ask, to show genuine curiosity about her background, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself paralyzed by the weight of explanation. Around, she said finally. You pick things. Up. Miguel nodded, accepting her evasion with grace. Well, whoever taught you knew what they were doing. That truck was running like a dream when it left here. As if summoned by their conversation, the rumble of the F-150's engine filled the garage. Through the open bay doors, Elena saw Marcus Thompson climbing out of the driver's seat, his 3 companions following. Her stomach knotted as she recognized the set of his shoulders, the aggressive swagger that had intimidated her before. "Danny!" Frank called out, but his voice cracked with nervous energy. "Your VIP is here." Marcus strode into the garage like he owned it, his gaze sweeping over the various workstations before settling on Elena. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she saw something there that hadn't been present during their first encounter: uncertainty. "Mr. Martinez," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I need to speak with whoever worked on my truck." "That would be Danny," Frank replied quickly, gesturing toward the senior mechanic. "He's our most experienced—" "No." Marcus's interruption was sharp. "I need to speak with her." He pointed directly at Elena, the woman who made the diagnosis. The garage fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt different. Expectant. Dangerous. Elena set down her wrench and walked toward the group, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She had learned long ago that showing fear only invited more predators. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice calm despite the chaos in her chest. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "My truck's been running. For 3 days now, smooth as silk. Better than it has in months." "Good," Elena replied, unsure where this was leading. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the turbo synchronization, about the pressure variations." He paused. "That's not common knowledge. That's specialized information." Elena remained silent, waiting. "So I made some calls, talked to some people." Marcus's voice grew quieter, more intense. "People who know about advanced automotive systems, military, specifications, the kind of technology that's not exactly available to your average small-town mechanic." The blood drained from Elena's face. She had been so focused on fixing the truck that she hadn't considered the implications of revealing her knowledge. In her old life, such expertise would have been expected, even celebrated. Here, it made her a threat. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but even to her own ears, the denial sounded weak. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see about that." What Marcus had discovered would shatter the carefully constructed life Elena had built, and force her to confront a past she'd tried desperately to escape. As the seals left the garage, Elena felt the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation, every sideways glance. She had tried so hard to remain invisible, to blend into the background of Riverside's automotive landscape. But now, like it or not, she was very much visible, and visibility, she knew from bitter experience, was the first step toward destruction. The following week brought an autumn chill that seemed to settle in Elena's bones. She arrived at the garage each morning, to find the atmosphere growing increasingly hostile. Customers who had once nodded politely now avoided eye contact. The other mechanics' conversations died when she entered the break room. Even the parts delivery drivers treated her with newfound suspicion. Frank called her into his office on Thursday afternoon, his face grave. "I've got a problem, Elena," he began without preamble. "A big one." She sat in the worn chair across from his desk, noting how he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Lieutenant Thompson has been asking questions about you, about your background, about where you learned to work on military-grade systems." Frank's voice carried a tremor she'd never heard before. He's got people looking into your history. Elena's mouth went dry. What kind of people? The kind that don't take mind-your-own-business for an answer. Frank finally looked at her directly. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Is there anything in your past that could hurt this business? Anything at all? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Elena thought about her life before Arizona, the patents, the corporate espionage, the lawsuit that had destroyed. Everything she'd built, the NDAs she'd signed, the settlement agreements that had bought her silence in exchange for a chance to disappear. Everyone has a past, Frank. That's not an answer. His voice hardened. I've got 3 kids in college and a mortgage that'll outlive me. This garage is all I have. If there's something you're hiding... I'm not hiding anything illegal, Elena interrupted. I've never been arrested, never been charged with anything. I pay my taxes and do my job. But, she sighed, knowing that partial truth was better than outright lies. I used to work for an automotive company in Detroit. It didn't end well. I came here for a fresh start. Frank leaned back in his chair, processing this information. What kind of work? Engineering, design. The kind of work that doesn't exist in Riverside. Jesus, Elena. Frank rubbed his temples. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why take a job as a basic mechanic when you could have been designing cars? Because sometimes you need to disappear. Sometimes starting over means starting at the bottom. Before Frank could respond, the garage door chimed. Through the office window, Elena saw a black sedan pull into the parking lot. 2 men in suits emerged, their movements precise and professional. Government, she realized with a sinking heart, or worse, corporate security. Mr. Martinez? The taller of the 2 men approached the office. I'm Agent Rivera, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This is Agent Walsh. We'd like to speak with one of your employees. Elena closed her eyes, knowing that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to crumble. Which employee? Frank asked, though his glance toward Elena made the answer obvious. Elena Vasquez. We understand she recently worked on a vehicle belonging to Lieutenant Thompson. The secret Elena had protected for 5 years was about to explode into the open, and with it, the truth about who she really was. The next hour unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. The agents were polite but thorough, asking questions about her qualifications, her diagnostic methods, her knowledge of military specifications. Elena answered carefully, sticking to facts while revealing as little as possible about her former life. Ms. Vasquez, Agent Rivera said finally, our preliminary investigation suggests you have expertise that's unusual for someone in your current position. We're not accusing you of anything, but we need to understand how a small-town mechanic knows classified information about military vehicle systems. I don't know any classified information, Elena replied honestly. I diagnosed a common problem using publicly available technical knowledge. The turbo-synchronization issue you identified isn't common knowledge, Agent Walsh interjected. It's a known vulnerability in that particular engine model, but it's not something that would be obvious to most mechanics. Elena felt trapped. Admitting her true background would invite scrutiny she couldn't afford, but continuing to deny her expertise would only make her look more suspicious. I read a lot, she said lamely. Technical manuals, engineering journals. I stay current. With automotive technology. The agents exchanged glances. Agent Rivera pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be a lengthy document. According to our records, Elena Vasquez has been employed at Martinez Auto Works for 5 years. Before that, there's very little documentation of your existence. No employment history, no credit records, no significant digital footprint. That's unusual in today's world. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had been so careful to build her new identity slowly, paying cash for everything, avoiding the kind of paper trail that would connect her to her former life. But apparently, that very caution had made her suspicious. I value my privacy, she said. Privacy is one thing, Agent Walsh replied, but this level of anonymity requires significant effort, almost like someone was trying to hide from something. Frank looked back and forth between Elena and the agents, his face pale. Gentlemen, I can vouch for Elena. She's been a model employee, never missed a day, never caused any trouble. We're not questioning her work ethic, Mr. Martinez. We're trying to understand how she acquired knowledge that should be limited to military contractors and defense industry engineers. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elena realized that her attempt to remain invisible had backfired spectacularly. By trying to hide her qualifications, she had only made herself more interesting to people who investigated anomalies for a living. "I think," she said quietly, "I need to make a phone call." The agents nodded. "We'll wait." Elena stepped outside the garage, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She found the number she'd been avoiding for 5 years and pressed call. "Hamilton and Associates," came the crisp professional voice. "I need to speak with Robert Hamilton. Tell him it's Elena. Tell him it's about the Blackstone case." While she waited for her former lawyer to come on the line, Elena watched through the garage windows as Danny, Rick, and Miguel pretended to work while obviously straining to hear the conversation with the federal agents. Frank sat slumped in his chair, probably calculating how much a government investigation would cost his business. "Elena?" Robert Hamilton's voice was cautious but not unfriendly. "I haven't heard from you in 5 years, I know. Robert, I need help. Federal agents are asking questions about my background, and I can't tell them the truth without violating the settlement agreement." "Slow down. What kind of federal agents?" "Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They think I might have access to classified information because I fixed a military truck." A long pause. "Elena, the settlement agreement expired last month. You're free to discuss your background now. In fact, you should know the Blackstone case has been reopened. New evidence has come to light." Elena's knees nearly buckled. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that proves you were right all along. The kind that's going to make some very powerful people very unhappy." As she ended the call, Elena realized that her quiet life in Riverside was over. The past she'd tried so hard to escape was about to collide with the present she'd built, and she wasn't sure either would survive the impact. She walked back into the garage, straightening her shoulders. If her anonymity was gone, then perhaps it was time to stop hiding. "Gentlemen," she said to the agents, "I think it's time we had a more detailed conversation." The conference room at the Riverside Police Department had seen better days. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scarred table where Elena sat facing Agents Rivera and Walsh. Frank Martinez fidgeted in his chair beside her, his face pale with worry about what revelations might destroy his business. "Before we begin," Agent Rivera said, setting a digital recorder on the table, "I want to be clear that you're not under arrest or suspicion of wrongdoing. However, given the nature of the technology involved, we need to understand exactly who we're dealing with." Elena nodded, her hands folded calmly in her lap. After 5 years of hiding, the prospect of telling the truth felt both terrifying and liberating. "My name is Elena Vasquez, but that wasn't always my name. Until 5 years ago, I was Dr. Elena Reyes, chief engineer at Blackstone Automotive Engineering in Detroit." Frank's jaw dropped. Agent Walsh leaned forward, suddenly more interested. "Dr. Reyes?" Agent Rivera repeated, consulting his tablet. "I see. That explains a great deal." "You know who she is?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Reyes held 14 patents in advanced automotive engineering by age 32. She designed the hybrid propulsion system that's currently used in 60% of military transport vehicles. Her work on turbo-synchronization technology saved the Department of Defense an estimated $200 million in fuel costs. Elena felt a strange mix of pride and pain hearing her accomplishments recited like a resume. That was a long time ago. "Not that long," Agent Walsh interjected. "Your patents are still being used. Your turbo-synchronization algorithm is literally installed in the truck you worked on. That's how you knew exactly what was wrong. You designed the diagnostic system." Frank stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. "You're that Dr. Reyes? The one who won the National Innovation Award? I remember reading about you in Automotive Weekly." That was before everything fell apart, Elena said quietly. What happened? Agent Rivera asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Elena took a deep breath and began the story she'd never told anyone in Riverside. She spoke about Victor Kane, her former partner who had stolen her designs, and claimed them as his own, about the lawsuit that had dragged on for 18 months while her reputation was systematically destroyed, about her father's death and the settlement agreement that had effectively banned her from the automotive industry. The legal fees consumed everything, she continued. I lost my house, my savings, my career. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented me from discussing the case or claiming credit for my work. I was also banned from working for any major automotive company for 5 years. That ban expired last month, Agent Walsh observed. Yes, but by then, I'd built a different life. I thought I could stay hidden. Frank found his voice. Hidden? You've been working for me for 5 years, and you never thought to mention that you're one of the most brilliant automotive engineers in the country? Would you have hired me if I'd told you, a disgraced former executive with a history of corporate lawsuits, or would you have assumed I was trouble? Frank fell silent, knowing she was right. Agent Rivera closed his tablet. Dr. Reyes, we need to discuss your current situation. The Blackstone case has been reopened based on new evidence that corroborates your original claims. The FBI's white-collar crime division has been building a case against Victor Kane for corporate espionage. Elena's heart skipped. What kind of evidence? Digital forensics recovered from Kane's company servers, email communications, file transfers, metadata that proves your designs were copied before he filed his patents. The evidence is comprehensive. More importantly, Agent Walsh added, the Department of Defense wants to discuss reinstating your security clearance. Your expertise is needed for several classified projects. The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Elena felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. There's something else, Agent Rivera continued. Lieutenant Thompson's inquiry wasn't just about security concerns. He was impressed by your work. He's been advocating for your reinstatement, arguing that the military needs engineers who can diagnose problems in the field. Marcus Thompson defended me? Elena asked, surprised. He said, and I quote, anyone who can fix a turbo synchronization problem with basic tools while being harassed by a bunch of arrogant SEALs is exactly the kind of person we need designing our equipment. Frank shook his head in amazement. 5 years. You've been here 5 years, and I had you changing oil filters while you could have been designing the future of transportation. I wasn't ready for that life again, Elena admitted. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without the corporate world defining me. And now? Agent Rivera asked. Elena looked around the stark conference room, thinking about the garage where she'd spent 5 years rebuilding not just engines, but herself. She thought about Miguel, the only person who had consistently treated her with respect, about the satisfaction of working with her hands, of solving problems without politics or corporate intrigue. Now I know exactly who I am, she said firmly. I'm an engineer who's learned the value of humility. I'm someone who can work with her hands and her mind. I'm a woman who won't be defined by other people's expectations or limitations. She paused, meeting each man's gaze. I'm ready to reclaim my life. But Elena's journey back from exile would prove more challenging than anyone imagined, and would require her to make choices that could change everything once again. Agent Walsh smiled. Then let's talk about your future. The Pentagon has several projects that could use your expertise, and with your experience in both design and field repair, you'd be invaluable. What about Blackstone Automotive? Frank asked. Won't they want her back? Blackstone's board has extended multiple offers, Agent Rivera replied. Full reinstatement, back pay, control of her own engineering division. They're desperate to rehabilitate their image after the Kane scandal. Elena considered this. And Victor Kane? He'll be arrested within the week. Federal charges of corporate espionage, patent fraud, and conspiracy. He's looking at significant prison time. For 5 years, Elena had dreamed of this moment. Vindication, justice, recognition of the truth. But now that it had arrived, She felt strangely detached from the desire for revenge. "I want to think about it," she said finally. "All of it. The Pentagon, Blackstone, everything. I've been making decisions based on fear for too long. I want to make this choice from a position of strength." "Of course," Agent Rivera said, standing. "Take your time. But Dr. Reyes, Elena, don't take too long. The world needs engineers. Like you. The country needs people who can solve problems under pressure." As the agents gathered their materials, Frank turned to Elena with a mixture of awe and regret. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have recognized your talent." "I should have—" "You gave me work when I needed it," Elena interrupted. "You gave me a place to heal. That's not something to apologize for." "What happens now? To the garage, I mean?" Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in days. "Now you hire better mechanics. You promote Miguel to senior technician. He's got excellent instincts. And you remember that talent comes in all forms, not just the ones you expect." As they left the police station, Elena felt the weight of 5 years of secrecy lifting from her shoulders. The truth was finally out, and she was still standing. More than that, she was ready to soar. The drive back to the garage was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Frank seemed lost in thought, probably reconsidering every assumption he'd made about his employees. Elena watched the familiar landscape of Riverside roll past, knowing that everything had changed in the span of a few hours. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Reyes, this is Lieutenant Thompson. Heard the news? Outstanding work on the truck. Hope you'll consider the Pentagon position. The country needs engineers who can think under fire. Semper. Fi." Elena smiled, tucking the phone away. For the first time in 5 years, her future felt wide open with possibilities. The question now wasn't whether she was qualified for the opportunities being offered, it was which one would let her make the biggest difference. The news spread through Riverside like wildfire. Within hours of the federal agent's visit, everyone in town knew that the quiet mechanic at Martinez Auto Works was actually a renowned engineer who had been living in hiding. The story had everything a small town loved: mystery, government intrigue, and the dramatic revelation that the woman they'd all underestimated was actually a genius. Elena arrived at work the next morning to find a crowd gathered outside the garage. Local news vans occupied the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters thrust microphones at her as she tried to reach the front door. "Dr. Reyes! What's it like being vindicated after 5 years? Will you be returning to Detroit? How does it feel to know your former partner is facing federal charges?" Elena pushed through the crowd without comment, but inside the garage she found even more chaos. The phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, job recruiters, and former colleagues. Danny and Rick stood near the coffee machine, their faces mixing curiosity with something that looked like shame. "Morning, Dr. Reyes," Danny said awkwardly, emphasizing her title. "It's still Elena," she replied, pulling on her coveralls. "Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Rick muttered. "We've been working next to a celebrity for 5 years and didn't know it." Miguel approached with a cup of coffee and a gentle smile. "How are you holding up, Hermana?" "Better than expected," Elena admitted, "though I could do without the media." "Circus!" Frank emerged from his office, looking haggard. "Elena, I've had 17 calls this morning, 3 from major automotive companies, 5 from news outlets, and 9 from people wanting to know if we're hiring genius mechanics." "I'm sorry about the disruption." "Don't apologize. I should be apologizing to you." Frank's voice carried genuine remorse. "I've been thinking all night about how we treated you, how I treated you, making you change oil and rotate tires when you could have been—" "Frank, stop." Elena's voice was firm but kind. "I needed those 5 years. I needed to remember that there's dignity in all work, that my value as a person wasn't tied to my professional reputation. Working here taught me that." Before Frank could respond, the garage door chimed. A woman in an expensive suit entered, her heels clicking authoritatively on the concrete floor. Elena recognized her immediately. Patricia Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone, Automotive Engineering. "Dr. Reyes," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I've been trying to reach you." The garage fell silent. Even the reporters outside seemed to sense the importance of this moment. "Ms. Blackstone?" Elena's voice was carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting you. I flew down as soon as I heard the news. We need to talk. I'm working right now. This is more important than—" Patricia paused, looking around the garage with barely concealed disdain. "This is more important than whatever you're doing here." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. Elena felt her co-workers stiffen, their eyes fixed on this exchange between two very different worlds. "My work is important," Elena said quietly. "All honest work is important." Patricia's expression softened slightly, as if she were dealing with a child having a tantrum. "Of course it is. But you're brilliant, Elena. You belong in research and development, not in some small-town garage. 5 years ago, your company's board told me I belonged in court, facing charges of corporate espionage. Now suddenly I belong in R&D again? That was different. We were misled by Victor Kane's lies. But now we know the truth." "You knew the truth then," Elena replied, her voice growing stronger. "You just chose to believe the version that was more convenient for you." Patricia's mask slipped, revealing the calculating executive beneath. "Elena, be reasonable. We're prepared to offer you full reinstatement, your old salary plus 20%, and complete autonomy over your projects. You'd have your own laboratory, unlimited research budget, and a team of the best engineers in the industry. And in exchange, you come home where you belong. You stop this, whatever this is." Patricia gestured around the garage dismissively. "You resume your rightful place in the engineering world." Elena looked around the garage, at Frank, who had given her work when she was desperate, at Miguel, who had treated her with respect from day one, at Danny and Rick, who were finally beginning to understand what they'd witnessed, at the familiar tools and machinery that had been her companions through the darkest period of her life. "This is my home," she said simply. "These are my people." Patricia's smile became strained. "Elena, I understand you're emotional about this situation. It's natural to feel some loyalty to the place that sheltered you, but let's be practical. What future do you have here? What problems can you solve? What innovations can you create?" "I can teach," Elena said, the words coming to her as she spoke them. "I can train the next generation of mechanics to think like engineers. I can bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application." "You want to waste your talents on automotive education?" Patricia's voice rose with incredulity. "I want to use my talents to make a difference." "Real difference, not just corporate profits." Patricia's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Elena. The industry has a long memory. If you turn down this opportunity, there might not be another one." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality. The automotive world is smaller than you think. Reputation matters." Elena felt a familiar chill, the same intimidation tactics that had been used against her 5 years ago. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she had people who believed in her worth beyond her ability to generate patents and profits. "My reputation is my own to build," Elena said, "and I choose to build it on integrity, not on bowing to corporate pressure." Miguel stepped forward, his voice steady. "The lady said no. Maybe it's time you left." Patricia looked at him with undisguised contempt. "I wasn't speaking to you." "You're in our garage disrespecting our friend," Miguel replied. "That makes it my business." Danny and Rick moved closer, their solidarity surprising even themselves. Frank straightened behind the counter, his face resolute. "I think," Frank said quietly, "you should leave, Ms. Blackstone." Elena's made her position clear. Patricia's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She wasn't accustomed to being dismissed by people she considered beneath her station. "This is a mistake, Elena. A career-ending mistake." Then it's my mistake to make, Elena replied calmly. As Patricia turned to leave, she paused at the door. The Pentagon offer won't last forever either. They want results, not sentiment. When you're ready to be realistic about your future, you know where to find me. The door slammed behind her, leaving the garage in stunned silence. Through the windows, they watched Patricia stride past the reporters without comment, her posture rigid with fury. Well, Danny said finally, that was something. You okay? Miguel asked Elena, concern evident in his voice. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. Not colleagues, she realized, but friends. People who had stood up for her when it mattered, who had chosen loyalty over opportunity. I'm perfect, she said, and for the first time in years she meant it completely. The phone rang again, jarring everyone back to reality. Frank answered with a weary sigh. Martinez Auto Works. Yes, she's here. No, she's not giving interviews. Because she's working, that's why. As Frank fielded another reporter's call, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Rivera. Pentagon meeting scheduled for Monday if you're interested. No pressure, but the offer stands. Your choice entirely. Elena stared at the message, weighing her options. The Pentagon represented everything she'd once dreamed of. Prestigious work, unlimited resources, the chance to shape the future of military technology. It was the career she'd lost, offered back to her on a silver platter. But as she looked around the garage, she realized that her dreams had evolved. 5 years ago, success meant recognition, awards, and cutting-edge research. Now success meant something different entirely. Miguel, she said suddenly, how would you feel about going back to school? He looked puzzled. What kind of school? Engineering school? Part-time while you work. I could help you with the coursework? Miguel's eyes widened. You think I could do that? I think you have natural instincts that can't be taught. The rest is just mathematics and physics. We can handle that. What about Danny and Rick? Miguel asked. They've got experience too. Elena looked at the two men who were listening with growing interest. Anyone who wants to learn. We could start an apprenticeship program here. Combine hands-on experience with engineering theory. Frank hung up the phone, his expression thoughtful. You're talking about turning this place into some kind of training center? I'm talking about creating something new, a place where theoretical knowledge meets practical application, where people learn to think like engineers while working like mechanics. And you'd give up the Pentagon for this? Frank asked, incredulous. Elena considered the question carefully. The Pentagon has thousands of brilliant engineers. They'll solve their problems with or without me. But here I could make a difference that lasts generations. Her phone rang. Another unfamiliar number. She answered reluctantly. Dr. Reyes? This is Colonel Amanda Hayes, Pentagon Engineering Division. I wanted to discuss the position we've offered. Colonel Hayes, I'm honored by the offer, but before you decide, let me explain what we're proposing. We don't want you chained to a desk in Washington. We need field engineers, people who can work with their hands and solve problems in real-world conditions. The position would involve training military mechanics, developing field-portable diagnostic equipment, and bridging the gap between complex technology and practical maintenance. Elena felt her heart skip. This wasn't the corporate executive position she'd expected. This was something entirely different. You'd be based wherever you think you can do the most good, Colonel Hayes continued. If you want to work out of a garage in Arizona while developing training programs for military mechanics, that works for us. We need innovation, not bureaucracy. The offer hung in the air like a bridge between her old life and her new one. Elena looked around the garage again, seeing possibilities she hadn't considered before. Could I bring a team? She asked. Local mechanics who understand both the practical and theoretical sides? If they can pass security clearance, absolutely. We believe diverse teams produce better solutions. Elena met Miguel's eyes, seeing excitement and hope there. She looked at Danny and Rick, who were following the conversation with growing interest. Finally, she looked at Frank, who was beginning to smile as he understood what she was considering. Colonel Hayes, Elena said slowly, I think we might be able to work something out. 2 weeks later, Martinez Auto Works had transformed into something unprecedented in Riverside's history. Pentagon engineers had arrived to assess the facility's potential as a training center, while reporters continued to document Elena's unconventional choice to remain in small-town Arizona. The most dramatic change was Miguel's enrollment in an accelerated engineering program. Elena had spent countless hours helping him navigate calculus and physics, watching his natural mechanical intuition flourish when supported by theoretical knowledge. His progress astonished even the university professors who reviewed his work. "I never thought I was smart enough for this," Miguel confided during one of their late-night study sessions. "Intelligence isn't about what you thought you couldn't do," Elena replied. "It's about what you discover you can do when someone believes in you." Danny and Rick had also signed up for the program, though their progress was slower. Danny struggled with mathematics but excelled at systems thinking. Rick had an intuitive grasp of materials science that impressed Elena's Pentagon contacts. Both men approached their studies with the determination of people who had been given a second chance at dreams they'd never dared to pursue. The transformation wasn't limited to education. Word of Elena's expertise had spread throughout the military community, bringing a steady stream of complex repair jobs to the garage. Vehicles arrived from bases across the Southwest, their problems ranging from simple maintenance to sophisticated diagnostic challenges that would have stumped most commercial shops. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson had become a regular visitor, bringing increasingly challenging projects and spreading word about the garage's capabilities among his SEAL contacts. His initial skepticism had evolved into genuine respect, and he often stayed to observe Elena's diagnostic methods. "I've never seen anyone approach mechanical problems the way you do," he told her one afternoon while watching her work on a reconnaissance vehicle's stealth modification. "You think 3 steps ahead of the problem." "Engineering is just applied problem solving," Elena replied, adjusting a sensor array with microscopic precision. "The secret is understanding that every problem has multiple solutions. You just have to find the elegant one." But not everyone in Riverside welcomed the changes. Some longtime residents resented the influx of military personnel and media attention. Others questioned whether Elena's presence was good for the town's traditional character. The tension came to a head during a town council meeting where several business owners voiced their concerns. "This used to be a quiet place," complained Martha Henderson, who owned the diner across from the garage. "Now we've got reporters and government cars everywhere. It's disrupting our way of life." "It's also bringing money into the community," countered Mayor Robert Wilson. "The hotel's booked solid for the first time in years, and local restaurants are seeing record business." "Money isn't everything," Martha shot back. "Some of us value peace and quiet over profit." Elena had attended the meeting at Mayor Wilson's request, though she'd tried to avoid the spotlight. When called upon to address the concerns, she stood slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of gazes. "I understand the disruption my presence has caused," she began. "That was never my intention. I came here 5 years ago looking for anonymity, and I found something much more valuable. I found a community that accepted me without knowing my credentials." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The attention will die down eventually. Reporters will move on to other stories, and the Pentagon will establish its training protocols. But what we're building here, the combination of practical skills and theoretical knowledge, that will last." "What exactly are you building?" asked Tom Bradley, a local farmer. "Opportunity," Elena replied. "Miguel Rodriguez will graduate next year with a mechanical engineering degree while maintaining his job and supporting his family. Danny Williams is discovering talents he never knew he had. Rick Patterson is learning that intelligence comes in many forms." She looked around the room, making eye contact with skeptics and supporters alike. 5 years ago, I thought my career was over. This community gave me a chance to rebuild my life. Now I want to give others the same opportunity, the chance to discover what they're capable of when someone believes in them." An elderly man in the back row raised his hand. "What happens when the Pentagon gets tired of this experiment? What happens to all these fancy programs when you move on to bigger things?" The question struck at Elena's deepest fears. She had built her new life around stability and community, but her growing responsibilities threatened to pull her back into the world of corporate politics and competing priorities. That's why we're building something sustainable, she said. The apprenticeship program will continue with or without me. The training protocols we're developing will become standard procedure, and the people we're educating will carry this knowledge forward long after I'm gone. After the meeting, Elena walked through downtown Riverside, reflecting on how much had changed since that first encounter with Lieutenant Thompson. The town still maintained its small-town character, but it now hummed with new energy and purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from Robert Hamilton, her former lawyer, Kane sentenced to 8 years federal prison. Blackstone stock down 40%. Your vindication is complete. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The vindication felt hollow compared to the satisfaction of watching Miguel master differential equations, or seeing Danny's confidence grow as he tackled increasingly complex repairs. At the garage, she found Colonel Hayes reviewing the latest training protocols with Frank and several Pentagon officials. The conversation stopped when she entered. "Dr. Reyes," Colonel Hayes said, "we were just discussing the next phase of expansion. The success here has exceeded all expectations." "What kind of expansion?" Elena asked cautiously. "We want to replicate this model at other locations, civilian-military partnerships that combine practical training with advanced engineering education. You'd oversee the entire program." Elena felt the familiar pull of larger responsibilities, bigger challenges, greater impact. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed of 5 years ago. "That sounds impressive," she said carefully, "but I've made commitments here. To the people I'm training, to this community." "Of course," Colonel Hayes agreed. "We're not asking you to abandon what you've built. We want you to expand it. Think of it as taking your successful model nationwide." The offer was tempting, but Elena had learned to be wary of opportunities that demanded everything while promising even more. She'd built her new life on the principle that success meant more than professional achievement. It meant having roots, maintaining relationships, and making a difference in individual lives. "I need time to consider this," she said finally. "Naturally, but Elena, may I call you Elena? What you've accomplished here is remarkable. The combination of practical skills and theoretical knowledge, the integration of civilian and military training, the focus on individual development within a community framework, it's revolutionary." As the Pentagon officials left, Elena remained in the garage, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells that had defined her life for 5 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new decisions about the direction of her life. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In a small-town garage where talent was nurtured, dignity was respected, and dreams were rebuilt one person at a time. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Miguel. "Just aced my thermodynamics exam. Thanks for believing in me, Professora." Elena smiled, tucking the phone away. Some victories were measured in patents and profits. Others were measured in transformed lives and realized potential. She was beginning to understand which kind mattered more. 3 months later, the garage had become something entirely unique in the American automotive landscape, a hybrid facility where cutting-edge military technology met small-town values, where theoretical knowledge was tempered by practical wisdom, and where second chances bloomed into extraordinary achievements. Miguel had completed his associate degree with honors and was now enrolled in a full bachelor's program while working as Elena's lead technician. Danny had discovered a gift for hydraulic systems that impressed even veteran Pentagon engineers. Rick had overcome his mathematical anxieties to become an expert in electronic diagnostics. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. But success, Elena had learned, often attracted the wrong kind of attention. The challenge came from an unexpected source, Congressman William Hartley, whose district included Riverside. Hartley had built his political career on opposing what he called government overreach and taxpayer waste. The Pentagon's partnership with a civilian garage struck him as both, a perfect target for his next campaign. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartley announced during a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse, "we have a situation where the Department of Defense is spending millions of taxpayer dollars to subsidize a private business. This is corporate welfare disguised as innovation." Elena watched the news coverage from the garage break room, her stomach knotting with familiar anxiety. She'd faced political opposition before, during the Blackstone lawsuit, and she knew how quickly public opinion could shift. "This is different," Frank assured her, though his voice carried uncertainty. "People here know you. They've seen what you've accomplished." "Politicians are skilled at making reality irrelevant," Elena replied, remembering how Victor Kane had twisted her reputation 5 years earlier. "If Hartley wants to make this about government waste instead of education and innovation, he might succeed." Her fears proved justified. Within days, Hartley's supporters were questioning every aspect of the program. Local newspapers received anonymous tips about excessive government spending on unproven training methods. Social media campaigns portrayed Elena as a failed corporate executive living off taxpayer money. The attacks culminated in a public hearing where Hartley demanded accountability for the program's costs and effectiveness. Elena knew this was her moment of truth, the chance to defend not just her work, but the dreams of everyone who had believed in the program's mission. This would be Elena's greatest test yet, not of her engineering skills, but of her ability to stand up for what she'd built and the people who had trusted her vision. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Reporters filled the front rows, their cameras focused on Elena as she sat at the witness table. Behind them, she could see the faces of people whose lives had been touched by the program. Miguel and his wife Maria, Danny with his teenage daughter, Rick accompanied by his elderly father, Frank, and his family. Congressman Hartley opened with his standard talking points about fiscal responsibility and government overreach. His questions were designed to embarrass rather than illuminate, focusing on costs while ignoring benefits. "Dr. Reyes," he said with theatrical concern, "can you justify spending $2.7 million of taxpayer money to train mechanics in a garage when that same money could fund veterans' benefits or infrastructure improvements?" Elena had prepared for this question, but seeing Hartley's smug expression triggered memories of similar interrogations during the Blackstone lawsuit. For a moment, she felt the familiar urge to retreat, to apologize for taking up space and resources. Then she looked past Hartley to see Miguel in the audience, wearing the Naval Reserve uniform he'd earned after his rapid promotion to engineering specialist. Beside him sat Danny, whose hydraulic innovations had been adopted by 3 military branches. Rick was there too, holding a certificate of commendation from the Secretary of Defense. "Congressman Hartley," Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "I can justify every penny. But more importantly, I can prove that those dollars have produced something invaluable, people who are prepared to serve their country with both skill and integrity." "Pretty words," Hartley replied dismissively, "but what tangible results? Can you show? What measurable return on investment?" Elena stood, her movement drawing every eye in the courthouse. She had learned over 5 years of hiding and 3 months of rebuilding that some moments demanded presence rather than words. "Miguel Rodriguez," she called out, "would you stand, please?" Miguel rose from his seat, his Naval Reserve insignia catching the light. 3 months ago, Miguel was changing oil and rotating tires. Today, he's designing hydraulic systems for amphibious assault vehicles. Last week, his innovation saved the Pentagon $17 million in procurement costs. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Hartley's expression tightened. "Danny Williams, please stand." Danny rose awkwardly, still uncomfortable with public attention. Danny spent 20 years believing he wasn't smart enough for anything beyond basic mechanical work. Last month, he identified a critical flaw in tank transmission systems that could have caused catastrophic failures in combat zones. His diagnostic method is now being taught at the Army's primary maintenance training facility. More murmurs, louder now. Hartley tried to interrupt, but Elena continued, "Rick Patterson, please stand." Rick stood with quiet dignity, his father beaming beside him. Rick discovered he had severe dyslexia, which explained his struggles with traditional education. When we adapted our teaching methods to his learning style, he revealed an extraordinary ability to understand complex electronic systems. He's now developing diagnostic protocols that will be used in every military vehicle produced in the next decade. The courthouse had fallen completely silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. "Congressman Hartley asked for measurable returns on investment. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. Here's what $2.7 million has produced: 3 men who went from changing oil to designing the future of military technology. Diagnostic innovations that will save hundreds of millions in maintenance costs, training protocols that will be implemented nationwide. Most importantly, proof that talent exists everywhere if we're willing to invest in developing it. She paused, looking directly at Hartley. But there's something else that money has produced, something that can't be measured in dollars or statistics. It's produced hope. Hope for people who thought their potential had already been determined by their circumstances. Elena gestured toward the audience, where dozens of people had gathered to support the program. Look around this room, Congressman. These are the faces of America's hidden potential. These are the people who will solve tomorrow's problems if we give them today's opportunities. Every dollar invested in their education and training returns tenfold in innovation, service, and national security. The silence stretched as Hartley seemed to struggle for a response. Finally, he managed, "That's very inspiring, Dr. Reyes, but inspiration doesn't justify taxpayer expenditure." "Doesn't it?" Elena asked quietly. "When inspiration produces innovation that saves lives and money, when it transforms unemployed workers into highly skilled technicians, when it proves that America's greatest resource isn't our technology or our military hardware, it's our people." She walked closer to Hartley's table, her presence commanding the room's attention. "You want to know about waste, Congressman? Waste is having brilliant people change oil for 20 years because nobody recognized their potential. Waste is losing wars because our equipment fails and we don't have enough skilled people to fix it. Waste is building walls between civilian and military communities instead of bridges that make us all stronger." Elena returned to her seat, but her voice carried clearly through the silent courthouse. "This program doesn't waste taxpayer money. It multiplies it. Every dollar invested here produces engineers, innovations, and capabilities that didn't exist before. More importantly, it produces citizens who understand that their value isn't determined by their starting point, but by their willingness to grow." The hearing continued for another hour, but the tone had shifted completely. Hartley's questions became increasingly defensive, while Elena's supporters provided testimony about the program's impact. Military officials presented data showing cost savings and efficiency improvements. Local business owners spoke about increased economic activity and community pride. When the hearing concluded, Elena felt cautiously optimistic. She had defended her work honestly and thoroughly, but political decisions weren't always based on facts or logic. That evening, as she cleaned up the garage after another busy day, her phone rang with a call from Colonel Hayes. "Elena, I wanted you to hear this directly from me. Congressman Hartley just announced that he's withdrawing his opposition to the program. More than that, he's requesting additional funding to expand it to other districts." Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion. What changed his mind? According to his staff, he spent the afternoon talking to Miguel, Danny, and Rick, apparently hearing their stories directly, not filtered through political rhetoric, made him understand what you've actually accomplished here. As Elena ended the call, she looked around the garage that had become so much more than a workplace. It was a symbol of second chances, a proving ground for hidden potential, and a bridge between worlds that had once seemed incompatible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, and new opportunities to prove that talent could flourish anywhere if given the right support. But tonight, she was content to savor a victory that had been won not through political maneuvering or corporate influence, but through the simple power of transformed lives and realized dreams. The final test hadn't been about defending a program. It had been about defending the belief that everyone deserved a chance to discover what they were capable of achieving, and that belief, Elena now knew, was worth fighting for. Epilogue. Legacy. 1 year later, Elena stood before a gathering that would have been unimaginable when she first arrived in Riverside. The garage had expanded into 3 connected buildings, housing classrooms, laboratories, and workshop spaces that buzzed with activity from dawn until well past sunset. The Riverside Institute for Applied Engineering had become a model studied by educators and military planners worldwide. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the buildings or equipment, it was in the people. Miguel Rodriguez adjusted his newly earned bachelor's degree hood as he prepared to address the graduating class of 23 students. As the Institute's first graduate to complete a full engineering program while maintaining his technician duties, he had become a symbol of what was possible when opportunity met determination. 5 years ago, Miguel began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I thought my ceiling was changing oil and rotating tires. I never imagined standing here with an engineering degree, speaking to people who will design the future. In the audience, Elena felt tears threatening as she watched her first student embrace his potential fully. Beside him on the platform sat Danny, now the Institute's head of hydraulic systems training, and Rick, who had overcome his learning challenges to become a specialist in adaptive diagnostic technologies. The graduation ceremony represented more than individual achievements. It marked the maturation of an idea that had seemed impossible when Elena first proposed combining practical training with theoretical education in a small-town garage. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, now the Pentagon's liaison for civilian-military training partnerships, served as the keynote speaker. His presence symbolized how dramatically relationships could evolve when prejudice gave way to respect. When I first met Dr. Reyes, Marcus told the gathered families and dignitaries, I made the mistake of judging her by my expectations rather than her capabilities. That mistake taught me something invaluable. The greatest threats to our national security aren't external enemies. They're internal assumptions that blind us to our own potential. He gestured toward the graduates, who represented a diverse cross-section of backgrounds and ages. Former factory workers sat beside recent high school graduates. Veterans transitioning to civilian careers shared the stage with career changers seeking new challenges. These graduates prove that talent isn't distributed according to our preconceptions. It exists everywhere, waiting for someone brave enough to nurture it and patient enough to develop it. As Marcus concluded his remarks, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The painful betrayal that had driven her from Detroit now seemed like a necessary detour rather than a devastating defeat. Without that humiliation, she never would have discovered the satisfaction of building something new rather than simply advancing something existing. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia Blackstone. Congratulations on today's graduation. Offer to join Blackstone's board still stands. Your innovations are changing the industry. Elena deleted the message without responding, as she had done with similar offers from corporate executives and government officials who suddenly wanted to associate themselves with the Institute's success. She had learned that some victories were too important to risk on the ambitions of others. Profesora Elena? She turned to find Maria Rodriguez, Miguel's wife, holding their youngest daughter. Miguel wanted me to give you this, Maria handed her a framed photograph showing the Institute's first day of operation. Elena barely recognized herself in the image, tentative, defensive, still carrying the wounds of her corporate exile. Beside her stood Miguel, Danny, and Rick, their faces mixing hope with skepticism as they embarked on an uncertain experiment. He says this is where everything changed, Maria continued, not just for him, but for all of us. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered for celebration, Elena found herself standing alone on the small stage, looking out over the crowd of graduates, families, and supporters. The scene reminded her of countless corporate events she had attended in her former life, but the energy was completely different. Those events had been about competition and individual achievement. This celebration was about collaboration and community transformation. People weren't networking for personal advantage. They were sharing genuine joy in each other's success. Dr. Reyes? She turned to find Frank Martinez approaching with a package wrapped in brown paper. His garage had evolved into the Institute's administrative headquarters, but he had retained his title as Chief of Practical Operations, a role that perfectly suited his blend of business sense and mechanical wisdom. The town council wanted me to give you this, Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena unwrapped the package to reveal a wooden plaque bearing the key to the city and an inscription. To Dr. Elena Reyes, who taught us that the greatest strength is lifting others up. The ceremony is nice, Elena said, accepting the honor with genuine gratitude. But the real reward is watching people discover what they're capable of. Speaking of which, Frank replied, I have some news. The Pentagon has approved funding for 5 additional institutes. They want to use our model in communities across the country. Elena felt the familiar mixture of pride and apprehension that accompanied every expansion opportunity. Growth was necessary for impact, but it also risked diluting the personal connections that made the institute special. Who would run them? She asked. Graduates from our program. Miguel has agreed to establish the first one in El Paso. Danny's interested in the Pacific Northwest location. Rick wants to stay here and develop online training modules that can support all the institutes. The beauty of the plan struck Elena immediately. Rather than expanding through corporate acquisition or government mandate, the institute would grow organically through people who understood its mission from personal experience. As the celebration continued into the evening, Elena found herself walking through the original garage where everything had begun. The space now served as a museum of sorts, preserving the tools and workstations that had witnessed her transformation from exile to educator. Her father's photograph sat on her old workbench, his words as relevant now as they had been during her darkest moments. Never let anyone define who you are. Talent speaks louder than words. She traced the frame gently, thinking about how those words had guided her through betrayal, humiliation, and ultimately redemption. But the redemption hadn't come through vindication or revenge. It had come through discovering that her greatest talent wasn't designing engines, but designing opportunities for others to discover their own potential. Elena? She turned to find Miguel standing in the doorway, his graduation gown still wrinkled from enthusiastic embraces. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You did the work, Elena replied. I just provided the opportunity. No, Miguel said, shaking his head. You provided something more important than opportunity. You provided belief. You made me understand that my value wasn't determined by other people's expectations. As Miguel left to rejoin his celebration, Elena remained in the quiet garage, surrounded by the tools and memories that had reshaped her understanding of success, purpose, and fulfillment. 5 years ago, she had arrived in Riverside, broken by betrayal and convinced that her career was over. Tonight, she stood in the same spot as the founder of an educational movement that was transforming lives across the country. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to disappear, she had discovered her true calling. In accepting what seemed like failure, she had found a success more meaningful than any corporate achievement. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message from an unknown number. Dr. Reyes, I'm a single mother in Phoenix whose son wants to be a mechanic but dreams of being an engineer. I heard about your institute on the news. Is there hope for someone like him? Elena smiled as she typed her response. There's always hope. Talent exists everywhere. Sometimes it just needs the right environment to flourish. Let's talk about making his dreams possible. As she turned off the lights and locked the garage, Elena reflected on the question that had haunted her since the day Lieutenant Thompson first challenged her competence. If you found yourself dismissed and underestimated, would you speak up immediately or let your actions do the talking? She had learned that the answer wasn't either or. Sometimes dignity required silence while you built strength. Sometimes justice demanded speaking truth to power. But always the most powerful response was creating opportunities for others to discover their own voices. The drive home took her past the welcome sign that still proudly declared Riverside's population and founding date. But the town she was leaving that night was fundamentally different from the one she had discovered 5 years earlier, not because of buildings or businesses, but because of transformed perspectives and expanded possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that potential existed everywhere if people were brave enough to nurture it. Elena drove through the quiet streets of her adopted hometown, finally understanding. That home wasn't where you came from, it was where you chose to build something lasting. And what she had built in Riverside would last for generations, carried forward by people who had learned that their worth wasn't determined by their starting point, but by their willingness to lift others as they climbed. In the end, that lesson proved more valuable than any patent, more powerful than any corporate position, and more lasting than any individual achievement. Some victories weren't measured in profits or recognition. They were measured in transformed lives and realized dreams, and those, Elena had discovered, were the only victories that truly mattered. The end. This story reminds us that sometimes our greatest setbacks lead to our most meaningful contributions. Elena's journey from corporate exile to community builder shows that true success isn't about personal achievement. It's about creating opportunities for others to discover their own potential. In a world that often judges by appearances and assumptions, the most powerful response is to build something that lasts beyond our own ambitions. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.